Folks, the Winnipeg Jets are about to face off against the Buffalo Sabres, and this is the first time that the Jets are going to experience Tage Thompson. Now, Thompson represents one of the most interesting stories in the NHL this year. We'll explore that story, why it might be a very fun one for a lot of reasons, and what the Jets might be expecting against a Sabres team that scores a lot but also concedes a lot. All coming right up on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HOLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform of choice, including Apple, Spotify, Google, Megaphone, Odyssey, and YouTube. Doing so is completely free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. But most of all, we just really love and appreciate your support. This episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Now, like I said at the top of this episode, the focus for tonight is going to be mostly on Winnipeg's upcoming game against the Buffalo Sabres. This is going to be a strange one for the Jets because Buffalo's kind of an odd team this year, right? They have one of the highest scoring offenses, but they also have given a lot of it back. And, you recall Eric Comrie going over there, signing a nice little contract. Wasn't like a massive deal, but certainly for a backup for the Jets, it was more than they wanted to pay, so they opted for Big Save Dave. And after a nice early start for Comrie, it hasn't exactly gone according to plan for him. Craig Anderson has honestly been playing better. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, I think, has also had a couple of looks off and on, but generally speaking, Comrie and Anderson have split the goal mouth this year, and Anderson has far and away been the much better performer. It's unfortunate for Comrie. I was kind of hoping that maybe this run with the Sabres would last. Maybe he'd finally found his form a bit, especially after what was a pretty solid run with the Jets last year. But, it seems like he's crashed a little bit back to earth. Some of it maybe on Buffalo's defending, some of it probably due to Comrie's numbers, maybe sort of regressing more towards where you'd actually expect his career average to kind of sit. But all the same, hoping that he eventually kind of picks it back up and finds a longer-term starting role. We all love Eric. He was a really nice guy. It seems like he was not exactly a fan favorite, but somebody that was very easy to root for, and it'd be nice if he could find at least some kind of a starting role somewhere. Now, as far as the rest of the Sabres are concerned, right, this team, it's quite explosive. I'm going to be honest. I think this is probably an even harder test than the Red Wings, and it's interesting because Buffalo, in a lot of ways, is very flawed. Defensively, they struggle to contain opponents. They often leave a lot to their goaltenders to try and bail them out. Hasn't always worked this season, but Anderson's done a good enough job. And quite honestly, the biggest story remains Tage Thompson. Thompson's emergence is very unusual because a couple of years ago, Tage, even up until last season, looked more like, maybe a one-shot wonder, one-hit wonder kind of thing. Previous years, he was like one of the worst fourth liners. Last season, he had a pretty big goal-scoring season, but you couldn't really tell if it's the sort of thing that was simply PDO and a hot shooting percentage or a sign of bigger things to come. The Sabres evidently felt that it was a much bigger deal than anyone was making because Tage immediately got a massive contract extension, which we were all kind of asking, a few questions about, but now it looks like a bargain. Tage has 57 points this season in 39 games. He has been an absolute monster, outperforming most centers of his caliber, and I think what makes him particularly interesting is he's like 6'8" or something. Skaters his size don't often really grow into elite players, especially on the attacking side of things. You look at his career trajectory and where he struggled. Mobility wasn't always the issue, but it was kind of like decision making, knowing how to use his massive frame and wingspan. And, certainly goal scoring was never one of his predominant traits. Most people probably imagined him to be something of a versatile middle six center, maybe a guy who could be like a more defensively oriented player because of his size, but that wasn't really what Tage has kind of molded himself into now. He is a phenomenal creator. He's got that stick handling and the balance to really cut around almost any attacker and maintain possession. His puck control is extraordinary. His stick handling is phenomenal. And he just seems to know how to undress defenders, especially in one on one matchups. He's been one of the most dynamic attackers this season. And I think when you look at the majority of skaters his size, he's like 6'6" or 6'7". How many of them have become elite scorers? Almost none. I mean, the way that Tage is playing and his career arc, I would say, is something that we're probably never going to see again. The closest comparison I can think of to how unique Thompson is probably Bufflin. I think Buff, in a lot of ways, will never be replicated as a defender. I think we can say the same thing about Thompson's rise. It's extraordinarily uncommon. In fact, it almost never happens whatsoever that a player that kind of has Tage's build and the start to his career that he had morphs into something like this. So, a fascinating story, a very interesting one, I think, for folks to kind of do a retrospective on. What did the Sabres see that others didn't? Why did the Blues not see it? And what, are the long term impacts of what Tage has accomplished? Are other skaters 6'5" plus suddenly going to be a hot commodity, especially as centers? Or is Thompson probably, more of a flash in the pan kind of thing? A one off that only he can really do these sorts of improvements and play this certain style of game. So, a very fun story, but of course, Buffalo is more than just one player or two players. We're going to take a look at the rest of the roster and see how it's doing because despite Tage's dominance and resurgence this year, he is not the only one lighting the lamp a lot. We'll check into those players in just a little bit, but before we go any further, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at betonline.net. BetOnline is your number one source for all of these sports and trends for everything from amateur to professional ball, whether you're interested in college ball or pro football as we head into the playoffs. They've also got plenty of basketball. And if you're looking for post-World Cup hangover cures, they've also got tons of great returns to domestic league football in many of the major European countries and other markets. So be sure to check them out. They've also got wonderful sports podcasts and news articles if you want to plug into your favorite sport in another method. But of course, they're always the easiest way to bet online. So be sure to register right now for a free account on your laptop or mobile device. Like I said, it is at betonline.net because BetOnline is where the game starts. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Jets. We are just talking about Winnipeg versus Buffalo, upcoming very big game. Not one that I think I would really count as like a must-win for the Jets, but certainly I think they would like to avenge their loss to the Detroit Red Wings with a nice win against a team that has actually climbed up the standings a pretty fair bit. I'm not going to say that the Sabres are necessarily a great team because I think there's still a lot that they're working on. I think that this is a team that has the potential in a couple of seasons to be really dangerous. But right now, I think that they're really fun and really flawed. And I think that's where, the consensus has kind of fallen. And you see it in their middling results. They're fourth in the Atlantic Division. They're actually ahead of the Florida Panthers, so that's pretty funny. But in general, I do think you look at this team and you are keeping in the back of your mind that there's a good chance they make into the first round or even somehow the second round. They're probably going to struggle with goaltending and defensive depth and end up, falling just short of advancing further, especially in the Eastern Conference, man. I mean, that is a monster division. Even if they make it to the conference finals, you might have like a Pittsburgh or a Carolina or even a Washington waiting for them. Not a fun time if you're the Sabres. In terms of other players outside of Thompson who have done really well this year, Rasmus Dahlin has been continuing his resurgent play. This year, he has 46 points in 38 games, which is monstrous. Honestly, in other years, that might be in the front running for, say, the Norris Trophy, but Morrissey, Carlson, a lot of these guys continue to dominate. And so, as impressive as Dahlin's season is, he's still a little bit behind some of his peers in that respect, but what a monster year from him. He's finally looking more and more like the number one defender he was drafted to be, and I don't think anyone could really be upset with his performance. Back further on the goal scoring and points list, you've got Alex Tuch and Jeff Skinner right around where Dahlin is pacing this year. Skinner, of course, will always be remembered for signing a massive contract extension and then, ending up not really doing much for the Sabres for a couple of years. Past season or so, I feel like he's really turned his game around. And since Granato has come along, Skinner is back to doing what Skinner does best, which is being an incredibly dangerous creator, scoring tons of goals, and just being a general menace. I mean, I used to love watching Jeff Skinner work. I thought that for many years he was very underappreciated. His figure skating background kind of played into how he got around on the ice and dodged opponent checks. So a very fun player to watch, one that I think maybe got a little bit too much hate, but by the same token, for what he signed for, it was not far off from like $9.5 million or something. It was a pretty crazy contract. Even if it was like $8 to $8.5 million, still a ton for what he's been producing. So yeah, for what he's being paid, you kind of expect the numbers that he's had: 41 points in 36 games, but still pretty darn good. The guy that I think I'm most enamored with in this team that's not Tage is Tuch, right? In terms of the forwards, not so much, we're not going to overlook Dahlin here, but for me, Tuch I've always been a big fan of. I felt like at the time when he got dropped by the Wild that, maybe Minnesota hadn't really felt that he was going to be much, and maybe they saw him as more of like a bottom six player. And then he comes to Vegas and immediately shows off that he is, the closest thing to like a fusion of Blake Wheeler and something else that we've seen in a forward like him. He's got those powerful drives down towards the slot. He's got great stick handling and vision. His passing is good. His shooting is a menace. Tuch just seems to check off like all of the classical boxes of what you want from like a big power scoring forward. But, with the Sabres, he's really found himself a good spot. He's, top three in scoring for the team. And it seems like he's not really slowing down anytime soon. 45 points in 39 games, almost a 50-50 split in point scoring this year. Yeah, I mean, he's just having a fun time, and I'm sure he and guys like Dylan Cousins and Casey Middlestad are all really enjoying life. It's interesting once you kind of get past Cousins, though, because all of a sudden you go from like 30 to 40 point scores down to like 20 to 25 points, and then it really trickles off from there. I think for Buffalo, the one thing that they're not going to be thrilled with long term is that the shooting percentage for all of their players is on the high side. We've seen this kind of previously with the Jets, where Winnipeg was maybe living a little bit beyond its means, shooting the lights out on the power play or at even strength, but conceding a lot of opportunities. And I think that's probably where Buffalo is. Right now, the Sabres can continue to hammer opponents, but the Jets are going to have to be really careful. I think for one thing, you just need Hellebuck to have a strong game. The tips and deflections, there were some that he couldn't really do anything about against the Red Wings, but there were a few other shots or saves that maybe you would expect him to either palm away or even stop and kind of close down on the puck. But it just didn't really seem like he was comfortable at all. So really hope that he has a major bounce back game. This is a very big one in terms of getting a sense of how the Jets rank against maybe like more mid-tier competition from the East. Obviously, the game against the Wings, I'm just going to throw that one in the trash fire. Sabres, I'm expecting a really close game, but I think the Jets win this one something like 5-4 or 4-3. Drop your score predictions below in the comments section or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. Now, before we close out tonight, I did want to talk about one topic that I think is very interesting. Scott Billeck from the Winnipeg Sun had a bit of a conversation with Kevin Cheveldayoff, was grabbing some quotes from him, and Chevy has given some indications as to maybe what he's thinking about for the next few months as the Jets near the trade deadline. before we dive into what Chevy is indicating and what we're sort of seeing with his tipped hands, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Built.com. If you're looking for a delicious treat but you don't want all of the fat and calories, you got to try a Built Bar. Built Bars are the only protein bar that tastes more like a candy bar, with a 100% real chocolate exterior and a soft, chewy interior. They've got tons of great flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. And of course, you're probably wondering, well, those all sound delicious, but are they any good for you? And as it turns out, most Built Bars clock in at around 130 to 150 calories, maybe 4 to 6 grams of net carbs, and anywhere from 15 to 17 grams of protein. This is a phenomenal product. I think Built Bars taste great. I've had a couple of them over the years, or actually more than a couple, if we're being honest. I've had a lot. But what's really convenient is that now you can get them at Walmart. You can also find a couple of other places like Sam's Club. You can get a 4-pack or a 13-bar box, whichever you want to give a shot to. It lets you sample a couple of different flavors and decide on what Built Bar is perfect for you. Once you're ready to place an order online, just head over to Built.com right now, because Built Bar's got some of the best stuff out there. And if you're like me and you're looking for a great protein bar that doesn't taste like crap, Built is for you. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Jets. We are just closing up real quick with some final thoughts from Kevin Cheveldayoff giving a few comments in a press conference to a number of reporters. Scott Billick from the Winnipeg Sun had some choice ones that he pulled out. And what I think we're seeing that's interesting with Chevy is he's kind of indicating he is thinking about trades. Not so much that part alone is surprising. I think Chevy does consider trades a lot more than people realize. It's just the problem is he never really does trades, right? So whether you think about it or you actually do it, those are two separate things most days with him. So it sounds like from his commentary, he's mostly waiting for the cap accrual. That cap space is really valuable for banking and eventually converting it into bigger contracts and maybe some bigger fish at the deadline. It sounds like Winnipeg is going to take it a little bit more patiently because they want to see where the lineup is at full strength. In my mind, I think we already know what this team is and where they're at. And that's like top 3 in the Central and like a top 5 berth in the West. I really don't think it's going to be that much of a stretch for them to at least feel like right now they're on a really good track to make the postseason. So if I were Chevy, I would look for a player who can slide in now, help Winnipeg cement its top 3 status in the Central, and also find somebody who can alleviate some of the pressure on some of the more injured players. It's clear that not every Jet skater that's come back is 100%, and I think it would be nice to add like another either top 9 or like maybe even a top 6 forward of some sort. I don't want to ask for like something crazy, but it would be cool. I think the Jets have a lot of opportunities, and with so many teams looking to sell, with the cap hits and the cap ceiling not exactly aligning in the best way that I think a lot of GMs were hoping for, Winnipeg has a good chance to maybe sneak in a deal here and there, find a player that's being cut, and give them a shot to really prove themselves for the Jets and maybe even profit off of it. So lots of interesting stuff. He did also mention Shibakrov and Rashevsky from the KHL. It sounds like Chevy wants to get them overseas as quickly as possible. I am definitely down for that. We know that Chibrikov and Rashevsky have both been very good scorers overseas. I think that they will have very natural transitions to the North American pro circuit. It may take them a little bit of time to get acclimated to North American ice, but I don't think it's going to be that bad. And they've already been playing pro hockey for a decent amount of time in Russia. So in terms of the difficulty of competition that they're facing, it's not an easy league. And I think that does bode well for what they might do if they first start off with the Moose or Jets and then kind of work their way from there. So really excited to see where this team starts to push itself over the next few months. Of course, Winnipeg has a back-to-back to close out this week, and Buffalo and Pittsburgh are not exactly the most softest competition that you could possibly ask for. It's going to be a tough one. It's going to be a dogfight. But if you want to be the best, occasionally you have to beat the best, not every time, but sometimes it really helps. And this is a good chance for the Jets to show once again that they are real contenders and that, a loss here and there doesn't really knock their confidence. I think this team knows how to rally. They've done it before, and I expect them to have at least a result in one of these 2 games, even if they don't collect all 4 points. But Let me know what you're thinking over this weekend split. Drop your comments below, of course, like I said, in the YouTube comment section, or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. I also highly recommend that you make your second listen Locked On NHL Prospects. It gives you all of the latest prospects and NHL draft rankings heading all the way up to the draft, plus team comparisons to give you a sense of your favorite team's prospect pool. But, of course, be sure to make that your second listen. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen. Have a great night, and I hope that Winnipeg comes out with a couple of victories for us once you are done listening.